I now invite His Excellency Jean-Claude Felix Rego, Chair of Delegation of the Republic of Benin. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Professor Tijani Mohamed Bande, President of the 74th Session of the General Assembly. Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Patrice Talon, President, Head of State and Head of Government, was not able to come to New York, but he instructed me to deliver on behalf of the Benin government the following message, and I will quote his statement. Mr. President, it is with particular pride that I would like, on behalf of the Benin delegation and my own personal behalf, to once again congratulate you on your election as President of the 74th Session of the General Assembly. And I would like to assure you of the full support of Benin for the success throughout your term. I would also like to congratulate Madam Maria Fernandez Espinosa Garces, your predecessor, for the excellent work that she accomplished during her term, and would like to reiterate my wishes of success to the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres. I wholeheartedly support the courageous reforms that he has launched. The 74th regular session of the General Assembly is taking place against a backdrop of a growing challenge to the principle of multilateralism, and it also is accompanied by serious challenges that have both climate, security, and social challenges. This is an extremely important challenge for the organization that we created 75 years ago. The topic of this session, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, and inclusion. This topic sums up the goals that we have defined for ourselves for the next 12 months as part of our joint efforts. These challenges force us to strengthen multilateralism. Multilateralism is indeed an expression of the interaction between peoples on an equal footing. It is more than ever necessary for our future. If all states simply withdraw and take cover behind their borders, and if we sacrifice our collective values, we will perpetuate today's tragedies and only move further away from our common goals. Indeed, it's multilateralism that will allow us to build a lasting peace and take up each one of these challenges. Now, the current session of the General Assembly is particularly important for the 2030 Development Agenda, in that we will begin our 5th year of implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, the various high-level events that have taken place, including the high-level political forum for sustainable development, high-level dialogue for financing for development, the high-level meeting on universal health coverage, as well as the high-level meeting to examine the progress achieved in the framework of the Samoa pathways. All these events were opportunities for us to exchange views and mobilize our efforts. These forums for discussion regarding the efforts that have already been undertaken and future actions aimed at accelerating the progress in moving towards implementing SDGs should make it possible for us to put an end to all forms of poverty and to combat against inequalities while making sure that no one is left behind. The United Nations Secretary General in particular urged us not to approach this meeting on the climate from the perspective of negotiation and discussion, but rather from the perspective of concrete commitments to future actions. My government is convinced that the current situation is very serious. This is why we have developed and submitted a very ambitious plan to contribute to reducing greenhouse emissions by 2030. And on this point, Benin plans to contribute to reduce accumulated greenhouse emissions in all energy and agriculture sectors by 16.17% for the period 2021-2030 by increasing our production of renewable energy, the capacity of production of renewable energy, as well as by conducting sustainable agriculture. Over the same period, we will increase the protection of our natural forests by focusing on reducing the annual rate of deforestation by 20,000 hectares and creating 10,000 additional hectares of forests. I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate from this tribune the commitment of my country to continue working to further sustainable development in order to achieve social inclusion, reduce inequalities, and in particularly by fostering an effective political impact through the stepping up of dialogue on social development issues, which are precondition for successful implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Mr. President, I would like to recall that my country is firmly committed to the principles and values enshrined in the UN Charter, as well as the fundamental principles of international law. My country deeply believes in international solidarity and common efforts in order to ensure the well-being of all nations. I would also like to renew the support of my country towards efforts aimed at a two-state solution in the Middle East, ensuring a viable Palestinian state with all the attributes of full international sovereignty, living side by side and in peace with the State of Israel. Furthermore, Benin regrets the continuing economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed against Cuba by the United States of America and would like to appeal for a constructive dialogue between these two countries so that they can achieve a lasting normalization in their bilateral relations for the happiness and well-being of their peoples. Mr. President, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Boutros-Ghali, used to say, if each ethnic, religious, or linguistic group sought to have their own state, fragmentation would have no limit, and peace, security, and economic progress for all would be increasingly difficult to achieve. End of quote. Peace and security of the Sahel are of crucial importance for the stability of our region. Now, meeting during the extraordinary summit of ECOWAS on the fight against terrorism last September 14th, we together reaffirmed our commitment to respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries against any attempts at separatism. I would like to associate with my colleagues from the sub-region and welcome the fact that the appeal of the G5 Sahel to the Security Council has met with approval and that this has led to the renewal of the mandate of the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Mission for the Stabilization of Mali, MINUSMA. In spite of its limited capacities and resources, my country, Benin, has always strongly supported international initiatives aimed at preventing crises and maintaining peace. The continual contribution by my country of peacekeeping troops to MINUSMA is a perfect illustration of this commitment. I would like to once again express the full solidarity of my government and the people of Benin to the countries of the G5 Sahel, but also to our neighbor Nigeria. All these countries have harshly been impacted by terrorism. Nevertheless, our countries have continued to focus on the well-being of our respective peoples by implementing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda in spite of this regional security challenge. Mr. President, the adoption of the 2030 agenda, and the launch of its implementation was indeed a very important step forward in the process of promoting the development of our states and the well-being of our peoples. The acceleration of in the implementation of this agenda was a major imperative for my government, which is striving to find innovative mechanisms to gain access to resources in order to ensure the financing of this agenda. After 4 years of implementation in Benin, one of the main lessons that has emerged is that the incorporation of SDG-related initiatives in national planning frameworks is essential for the effective implementation of the 2030 agenda. This agenda must focus on the principle of harmonizing the principles of prioritization, coordination, and partnership. After an exercise of analyzing the national context and in selection of SDGs, my government has focused its actions on three main priorities: policies of sustainable food security, policies of resilient production, and inclusive policies that generate positive synergies. On each one of these critical access points, we have strived to focus on specific actions that lead to cross-cutting impact. In the framework of guaranteeing quality education for children, we have set up a national integrated school lunch program, which makes it possible not only to improve school performance, but also to improve the health and nutrition of our children, but also to develop local agricultural production, which also generates a substantial revenue for farmers. These coordinated efforts have made it possible to reduce the prevalence of food insecurity, which has dropped by 1.4% over the period 2013-2017, by promoting the establishment of sustainable food supply procedures and healthy nutritional practices. This critical entry point in the education sphere has led to positive synergies and has reduced hunger, improved health, and the well-being. To generate further similar positive results, strengthening our system, strengthening the resilience of our production system is our second major critical access point. And this has led inter alia to specific action to improve the management of our lands and specifically the protection and rehabilitation of deteriorated soils to improve food security. This measure to adapt to climate change has made it possible to train some 13,000 farmers in sustainable land management, and 92% of them have adopted sustainable practices. And indeed, my government has considered the creation of an international research center for resilient agriculture to climate change, CIRAC. Now, by strengthening the resilience of our systems of production, protection and rehabilitation of our soils makes it possible to adapt to climate change. It makes it possible to increase productivity and create jobs, reduce hunger, and ultimately to reduce poverty. This obviously generates important positive synergies for the 2030 agenda. And lastly, so as not to leave any person behind, Benin has devised, as part of the third critical access point, a project of strengthening human capital insurance for the most vulnerable groups in our society in the sectors of agriculture, commerce, transport, handcrafts, art, and culture. By providing health insurance, training, credit, and retirement pensions to 22% of the people in our country without health care, and to the 18% of our population who are extremely poor. This specific project has made a concrete contribution to eradicating poverty, to ensuring social protection, apprenticeship, training, and access to decent jobs. Now, at the end of a pilot phase, the implementation at the national level should further bolster other specific actions to improve our social safety net, which have a cross-cutting impact on the SDGs. The third critical access point, again, in order to improve the living conditions of our people, as part of that, my government has invested significantly in the area of drinking water in order to achieve by 2021 the implementation of SDG 6. Furthermore, it has reduced by half our energy dependence by launching new electricity production capacities to the tune of 127 million megawatt, with a goal of achieving 400 megawatt by 2021, with a ensuring an energy mix of 25% of renewable energies. Now, taking into account the recommendations regarding regarding the role of the watchdog agencies in countering corruption and in improving public finances, Benin has launched a broad program of reforms in economic governance. The improvement in effectiveness resulting from the implementation of these reforms have had an impact on administration, the judiciary, political parties, and all this has made it possible to enhance the effectiveness of public action. Now, among the emerging trends that could present opportunities for financing the program of the 2030 Development Agenda, in the medium term, my government has decided to focus on reforming public financing to foster investment in investments, as well as combating illicit financial flows and returning assets from abroad. This is why the fight against impunity and corruption is at the very heart of all our priorities. It is in order to optimize the use of state resources that we have set up implementing agencies which play a extremely important role and ensure the implementation of actions aimed at greater efficiency. Indeed, the strengthening of oversight authorities in the area of public financing is extremely important. These measures aim at striving that financial resources truly serve their ultimate aims, and to make sure that national actors comply with rules in public financing. To sum up, Benin has undertaken important actions to accelerate progress in implementing the SDGs. These include access to transport infrastructure, electric energy with the launching of new capacities that brings us closer to independence, and cleaning up the main cities in our country, and ensuring access to decent work for young people, and empowering women. At the political level, we have undertaken wide-ranging reforms of the political party system and the electoral system. And with this in mind, the Charter of Political Parties and of the Electoral Code, which was approved in July and September of 2018 by almost unanimous support from all members of Parliament, is the main outcome of the process that was launched at our 7th legislature in 2015. The key problem targeted by this reform is to remedy the process of political fragmentation, to avoid parliamentary instability, and to ensure that each political party plays the role that is assigned to it, and to implement in a coherent way its program. Now, this electoral code, as well as the charter for political parties, have formed the foundation of or the basis of the organization of legislative reforms in April 2019. Now, this democratic electoral process, in spite of some disputes that are inherent in any process of reform, have been conducted smoothly by the National Electoral Commission, and have led to the election of our 8th Parliament, 8th National Assembly, which formally began its session on the 16th of April 2019. Mr. President, to conclude, 30 years after having undertaken a historical commitment to children from around the world by adopting the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we today we have an opportunity to reaffirm that commitment and to make sure that each child can enjoy all of their rights. My delegation welcomes the ratification of the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, establishing a procedure for the submission of communications, which was adopted in New York on the 19th of December of 2011. Furthermore, my country is convinced that the absolute priority today should remain a close cooperation between states and a smooth functioning of international organizations whose main role is to ensure the promotion of common interest and collective security. That is the meaning that we see in the 74th session of the General Assembly, which seeks to galvanize multilateralism, which is the only guarantee of success in resolving our global challenges in the area of climate change, the fight against poverty, and trying to develop quality education. I would like to wish every success to this session, and thank you for your attention. End of quote.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of the Republic of Benin for his statement.